Greetings. I'm Nikon Balial of Global Justice Journal, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Ashok Panikkar, international conflict mediator and founder of Metaculture, a global organization committed to helping people develop the knowledge, skills, and understanding needed to build and sustain a culture of democracy. Ashok, thank you for joining us today.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Global Justice Journal, CC, and you, Nikon. Such a pleasure to be with you folks because you're working in a very difficult part of the world, and there is just so much of complexity in the kind of situation you folks are dealing with. And I feel honored to be given this opportunity to talk about one very small aspect, but which I think may have a huge bearing in the way the world deals with issues related to peace and justice and equality and all those wonderful things that we talk about so much. So, again, thank you, CC and the Global Justice. And I'd like to start with my title. I want to talk about language and conflict and coexistence and the interrelationships between these. And I see these as such complicated and complex issues and ideas, and that very often when we as peace builders, for instance, we rush into situations, we tend to take some of these ideas and concepts at face value while we get extraordinarily enmeshed and we analyze and we get into the nitty-gritty of a specific conflict situation. So you can look at my presentation as a stepping back from the nuts and bolts and the strategizing that is involved in peace building. So for starters, I want to just say that, and many of us know this, there's nothing simple about peace and coexistence. And that in this presentation, I will examine the relationship between language, words, and ideas. Because particularly in the Cameroon context and the conflict today, language is central. But is it only a language issue? Is it only an issue between the French speakers and the English speakers? We know that it's more complicated. So, but how do we step back from this in order to look at this in a slightly different way? Hence, this presentation, while it is in the context of the conflict in Cameroon, it is for anyone who might be interested in dealing with a complex issue such as peace. I want to walk us through the relationship between peace, reality, the way in which the human brain works, the notion of feelings, the reality of feelings, the idea of perceptions, the idea of thoughts and words. Before we even move to the idea of stakeholders, local politics, and geopolitics. Let's start with the human brain. This is not going to be a lecture on the science of the human brain. I'm guessing most of you have some understanding of it. I want to just highlight some aspects of the brain that are inescapable and that we carry with us. So it needs no saying, and yet I will say that the brain is the most extraordinary instrument that we know of. And it's locked in our skulls. We cannot see our own brain. And even with the best technology today, we can barely glimpse at the complex working of the brain. It is, we know, from the poets and the philosophers and the artists across centuries, we know that the human brain is capable of extraordinary precision, nuance, and complexity. We also know that, unfortunately, it's extremely unreliable, and there are many what I would call manufacturing glitches in the brain. It requires constant servicing and expensive maintenance. Now, what does that mean? It means that very often the brain can very easily lead us astray. It can go off the rails, so to speak, because of the ways in which the human brain reacts to the body as well as the external environment. It can let us down when we most need it. So here's the reality we have to deal with when we talk about the brain. It is extraordinary. It is a phenomenally nuanced, high precision instrument, but it's also an instrument that's very, very unreliable, and we have to work with it. I want to start talking about feelings and emotions because, particularly in the last 40 odd years, we have, as particularly Western society, but I would say modern societies everywhere, have rediscovered the importance of psychology and emotions and feelings. And there has almost been a retreat from the world of reason and science. This has been most exemplified by the rise of the right wing in different parts of the world, whether it's Modi's India, whether it's Trump's USA, whether it's the reaction to COVID. Emotions can be understood as our body's mostly physical responses to external and internal stimuli. In other words, these are almost involuntary. Feelings are a little different because feelings are the mental pictures that we create that are a reaction to these physical responses, those emotions. But they're very interlinked. Suffice to say, it's very difficult to manage our physical emotions because they are almost involuntary. With tremendous training, yogis and certain people who have learned to master their bodies can possibly manage, if not control, their emotions. But many of us can manage our feelings with proper training. It's important to recognize the difference between emotions and feelings, but also recognize that they're very interlinked. Let's come to the entire question of perceptions. When I was in grad school in the late 90s, it was commonplace to hear people talk about perceptions being reality. People loved saying, well, perception is reality. And in the beginning, it made sense to me until I started looking at it a little closely. And the more we know about perceptions, we realize that they are merely neurophysiological processes, that they are important because they govern our ability to see, hear, and make sense of the world around us through our senses. They also, and this is very vital, they allow us to understand, interpret, and create pictures about the world. Perceptions are almost instantaneous. And that is why they're linked with intuition. They help us intuitively to understand and gain insightful understandings of the world. So that's where perceptions are. And it's important. For the moment, let's just park our understanding of intuition, or rather of perception. At one end, you have emotions and feelings. At another end, you have perceptions, how we garner a picture about the world. And then there is the entire idea of a thought, which is distinct from an emotion and a feeling. It's distinct from a perception because it is an idea or an opinion that either occurs spontaneously or it is produced by deliberate thinking. So, yes, it is entirely possible that a thought can pop up in the mind. But that thought which pops up in the mind is more often than not an idea that has come out of our memory or has crystallized around a perception that we have experienced. I want us to focus on B, thoughts that are produced by deliberate thinking. The moment we say deliberate thinking, we are moving away from the physiological brain into that entity that we call the mind. The mind is a construction. The brain just exists. We were born with the brain, but the mind is something you and I have the capacity to develop. We can talk in terms of a thought as not only being different from feelings and emotions, but in some fundamental ways, it can be affected either positively or negatively by feelings and emotions. This is what makes thought so complicated, because a thought is not a pure concept that has been created by deliberation. While a thought can be created by deliberation, our brain is so powerful. The hormones, the chemicals acting upon our brain are so pervasive that any thought, even a purely rational thought, very often gets colored by our emotions and our feelings. Much of what critical thinking, which is a topic that a subject that I've been teaching since 1988, much of critical thinking is about the capacity to separate these and to understand where my pure, deliberate, constructed thought exists and where it is colored or biased by my memories, my prejudices, my emotions, my fears, my hopes, my disappointments. Then we come to words. And one could make the case that if not for emotions, if not for feelings, if not for perceptions, and if not for thoughts, there would be no words. Words are an extraordinarily modern development or evolution in the history of the Homo sapien species. And as far as we know, we are the only species that has such a complex vocabulary of words. And even for us, we probably went through millions of years grunting and without the capacity for abstract thought and for abstraction itself that allowed us to create words. So words are tools, as much a tool as a spanner or a screwdriver that we human beings have fashioned. Think of it as just one unit of speech or writing. It also is expressed as a single distinct speech sound, which most importantly symbolizes and communicates something specific. It has a meaning. We can think of it as the smallest isolatable, meaningful element of language, which has to be used with multiple other words in order to form a cohesive, cogent, complex thought in a sentence. I would hazard the guess that it is words that allow us to be intelligent. It's words that allow us to be wise. This is very important because we call ourselves Homo sapiens. the wise humans, almost assuming that just because we are born with a brain, we can be wise. And that is both a fallacy and it's extraordinarily arrogant, because we are not born with wisdom. Wisdom takes enormous effort. Yes, we have these words. And ever since we have invented words, we have struggled to understand them because they're very slippery. The way you use a word and the way I use a word are different, the very same word. It depends on your state of mind. It depends on your history with the word. It depends on the culture that you come from. They used to say that England and America are two countries separated by the same language. You can use the same word to mean a zillion things. And I can hear a word of yours and think, oh, I know what she's saying. You use the word peace, and I think, yes, I like peace. I want peace just like you. And then we start negotiating, and I realize you don't want peace. And you look at me and say, what kind of a peace are you talking about? At the most basic thing, basic level, yes. Words help us communicate our ideas and our perceptions. That's at the basic level. But what's interesting is the meanings we attribute to words also crystallize or give form to the perceptions that we have. So our perceptions, when we wish to communicate it, we select words that most closely correspond with our perceptions. And we communicate that laden with the meaning that we have attributed to it. And these perceptions, from that point onwards, shape our beliefs. The beliefs that we have, expressed through the words, drive our behavior. And one could even say that it's our behavior that creates the world, or at least a part of the world that's influenced by us. We also tend to react emotionally whenever we hear a word, whenever we speak it or we read it. In other words, the word itself morphs and undergoes changes. The ways in which we hear it, the ways in which we use it. So there is no word that has an absolute meaning which will always be carried out in the same way. I want us to look at what reality is, because so far we've been talking about perceptions, we've been talking about emotions, feelings, we've been talking about thoughts and even words. All of this is in the mind. It's locked between our ears. It's hidden in this thick skull of ours. And it's an attempt by us to use all our senses and capabilities in order to understand what's outside us, the external world, which is what we have to call reality, because it exists independent of us. Unfortunately, much of the world as we understand it is based on all these things we've talked about: our perceptions, our intuitions, our imaginations, and our fears. It's based on the ideas we generate, the concepts we come up with, the theories and hypotheses. It is based on our wishes and dreams and fantasies, including wishes and dreams and fantasies of peace. So what is reality really? I would suggest that reality is the sum of everything that exists within any system. The reality of your room is the floor, the roof, the walls, the cupboards, the table, the chair, the texture of the table, the softness of the cushion, the books around you, the quality of the air. You are not imagining the humidity. The humidity exists. It is everything that surrounds you. That is the reality of your room. Similarly, you have a reality outside of your room. Some of it you cannot even see, yet it is your reality. Outside of your vision, there is a reality, even if you can't see it. A person who is in prison may think that their entire reality is the room, but it is more than the room, even if he cannot see outside the room. It is anyone that can affect us. Our friends, our families, the bus driver, the people who like us, the people who don't like us, they are all part of our reality. It is anything, not just the table and the chair, but the weather and the viruses and the blood pressure and the cholesterol that we have. All of this is our reality. You can't imagine cholesterol. You can't imagine that you don't have cholesterol. It is any place, which can be your neighboring countries, your neighboring cities. It can be the things that happen in another country. It can be Syrian refugees. It can be the Rohingya. It can be the women in Afghanistan. All of this is part of your reality. It is also any system, the economy, the culture, the smartphones, the automobiles, and the internet. They form your reality. Whether you use a smartphone or not, it has become a part of your reality. So the important thing is to recognize that reality is the totality of a system, known and unknown. I want to say that what distinguishes reality from non-reality is that you can't just imagine a reality. So, unfortunately, being human and being locked in our skulls, we all have our own ideas about reality. There is what is real, and there is what we believe about what is real. There is the reality of the COVID virus, and then there is what many people believe is the reality of COVID. That you can, in India, there are people who went around saying you can drink cow's urine to get rid of the virus. That it's a conspiracy, it doesn't really exist. There is also, beyond belief, the desire to create our own version of reality. Each one of us being affected by reality, we want to fashion reality in our own, if not image, then at least vision. The belief and the desire exist in our minds. However, and this is where the rubber hits the road, just because I believe something, it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it reality. This is a very traumatizing recognition for most of us. When a child realizes that other people also have feelings, and just because I, a 3-year-old, want something, it doesn't mean that other people's needs, my mother's or my siblings' needs, are unimportant. It's a traumatizing realization for a child. Similarly, we are all children in that we exist in our skulls, and we all would prefer to believe that we can create reality and that our idea of reality is superior and more authentic than other people's ideas of reality. But that is a fallacy. So, a few more facts about reality, because reality is at the core of everything. We cannot escape it. The laws of physics govern everything about the material world. Whether we like it or not, we cannot escape Newton's laws. We cannot escape gravity except by creating extremely sophisticated machines to create a temporary state of zero gravity, which only proves the point that we are creatures of and existing, governed by the laws of physics. We are also biological creatures, and we are constrained by our mortal bodies as much as we are constrained by the mass of flesh and blood vessels and neurons that constitute the brain. We have also been shaped by our evolutionary journey through many transformations and evolutions into this state as Homo sapiens. This evolutionary journey has defined us in many ways. As to history and social conditioning have driven us. We exist because of physics, biology, evolution, history, and culture. We cannot exist outside of it. The laws of the universe cannot be cancelled just because we don't like them. This is the essence of reality. More on reality. You will realize as you speak with me that I love reality because it is what is least understood, most manipulated, and most twisted, and nothing, least of all peace between two peoples, can come into being unless we really pay respect to reality. Our brains are designed to protect us from threats. That is why we have brains. That is why the brain evolved, not to do strategic thinking, not to do complex art. Our brains were designed in order to protect us from wild animals, from enemies, from volcanoes and earthquakes. It is true that our brains are also capable of phenomenal things like altruism, compassion, and empathy. It is true. Scientists today know that there is wiring in the brain that allows us to feel all these beautiful things. Religion. We also know that with the neocortex and the frontal lobe, that our brains are capable of reason and logical thinking. Yes, it is true. However, every time we are threatened, we will still act defensively. We will still lash out. And it is only in situations of extreme confidence and security that we can reason and think straight. So it doesn't matter that we have the capacity for altruism and compassion, for critical thinking and reasoning. The moment we are scared, or we are sad, or we are angry, or we feel a sense of loss, everything shuts down and we lash out, or we break down, or we melt down. This is the reality of our brains and our minds. I will try to give you only one more fact about reality, which is about diversity. You see, we love diversity, but it's also true that we can be comfortable and at home only with those who are close to us. Let that sink in. We are at home only with those connected by blood or people we've known for years, sometimes for generations. We accept outsiders and dissidents and outliers only if we decide that they are non-threatening. In other words, diversity is all very well. We love the idea of diversity. When we go to a Chinese restaurant or a Mexican restaurant, or we buy a shirt from Latin America, we wear it, we eat the food, we think we are appreciating diversity. But the fact is that all of that is the consumption of diversity or the products of diversity. To bring diversity into our intimate spaces requires far more than entertainment or recreation. It requires far more than stimulation. It needs enormous safety and trust. Trusting outsiders takes an enormously long time and can easily be lost. When threatened, we flail about, we lash out, and we very easily resort to violence. We cannot help it. It's built into us because of evolution. We survived for millions of years because of this capacity to react instantaneously to threats. Otherwise, we might have been wiped out thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years ago. In nature, this is an aspect of reality we need to grapple with. Violence is the norm. It's not an exception. In the jungle, violence is the norm. Whether it's an earthquake or a tiger, it is just how survival happens on the planet. Those of us who love peace, who have devoted 20, 30 years of our lives to conflict resolution and peace building, we need to recognize the primacy, the central role that violence plays in human existence and human survival. If we don't understand that, we will never be able to transcend violence. I mentioned that we all love the idea of changing reality to fit our own ideas about it. And this is because, unlike cats and dogs or tigers or lizards, we have a very acute imagination. This is beautiful, this imagination. So much comes out of it. This imagination is also what makes us unhappy with our current state of affairs. There was I believe it was an English psychologist way back in the 1940s or 50s who called creativity itself divine discontent. The discontent of the gods. This comes because of our capacity for visualizing, a capacity for fantasizing, a capacity for imagination. We are constantly trying to make things around us better for us. We are trying to constantly make things more comfortable for ourselves and for the people we care about. Therefore, each one of us has very strong ideas about what should be. You have strong ideas about what your parents should behave like, what your spouse should behave like. Your best friend, you have very clear ideas about how he or she should change. I have ideas about what my government does wrong. We cannot help it. We also have ideas about security and prosperity. And I want to start with this because our imagination leads us to try and create secure and safe societies. When we do that, when we start looking for security and safety, we also look at violence as a problem. Because it's obvious, when there is violence, we don't feel safe. So, ergo, violence is a problem. Once we have a certain semblance of security and safety, we start looking for prosperity. And prosperity can be defined as not just food and shelter today, but food and shelter tomorrow. Prosperity is that state that allows us to not worry about our security, material or emotional security for a certain period of time. The moment we achieve some kind of security, we then start looking for more complex needs of ours, like in Maslow's hierarchy. We start looking for justice and dignity and equality. And today, everyone talks about equity. And at that point, we start looking for peace, not just as absence of violence. We start looking at peace as harmony and dignity, peace with justice. So our conception of peace also changes as we move from merely being secure to being prosperous, and then trying to maintain security and prosperity. This also leads us to an enormous mistake. I call it a fallacy, the fallacy of eternal peace. Because once we have security and prosperity, we not just need peace to protect these, but we also decide for ourselves that nonviolence is the only way we can achieve peace. We can achieve peace and thereby protect security and prosperity. The idea of nonviolence at this level can arise only under certain conditions. No cat, a stray cat on the street, when confronted by a pack of dogs, can conceive of the idea of nonviolence. It takes enormous confidence to even think of the idea of nonviolence. And under most circumstances, it's not possible. But we humans, having the imagination, having the sense of discontent with the world as it is, we become idealistic and we start looking at conflict and violence itself as something so terrible, so beyond the pale that it needs to be banished. That's when we start looking at nonviolence not just as a tactic or a strategy, but a lifestyle. And then we look for sustainable peace. We look for eternal peace, because nothing short of that will satisfy us. And that is the beauty and the tragedy of being human. We not only want something good, we want it forever. And we don't want it even remotely compromised. These have huge implications. I want us to look at the idea of peace as a complicated idea, but a very simple word. Because peace is about social harmony. It suggests friendship, but it also primarily suggests absence of conflict and violence. It is usually brought about because some people with influence, leaders, are able to create agreements that prevent the stakeholders or the people living there from doing certain things. It places restraints on actions in order to establish whether it's local, regional, or global peace. It's these restraints that spur security and prosperity and engagement. What we do not recognize very often is that all of this is achieved with extraordinary compromise. And the idea of compromise is we cannot have it all. That in order to get even 6 minutes of safety, we have to compromise on something. In order to ensure that we eat tomorrow, we have to compromise on something. Security, prosperity, and peace come because we are willing to trade off something else. Particularly in the last 15 years, in highly individualistic societies, we have focused a lot on self-care and inner and social peace. And this is true. These are important for us. In fact, if each person in a situation, whether in a family or in a relationship or in community, had this inner peace, we would not fight. We would not have wars. Unfortunately, it takes enormous work to achieve that inner peace. And most humans are not capable of this. We don't have the time or the energy, and often do not have the self-restraint and the knowledge to achieve this. So while it's good to talk about inner peace and social peace, we need to recognize the reality that waiting for that will not give us the kind of peace we're talking about in any given geography. Now, I'd like to talk about certain conditions for peace. There's trust, there's community, and there's comfort. If we don't have trust, a sense of community, a sense of comfort, we will find it very difficult to create peace. The second, we've already touched upon, security, which is material and physical safety. 3, we must have the capacity as human beings to have pride, a sense of pride and personal and group dignity. Without that, peace is not possible. We must also have sufficient freedom and autonomy. This is a huge set of things to have: trust and security, pride, dignity, and freedom. That's like an extraordinary wish list. And this is our problem. That is when we run up against reality. Perfect peace is elusive. If we wait for perfect equality and justice before we find perfect peace, we are doomed to continue to fight. Peace, and this is a tragedy, but a tragic reality. Peace is not as attractive to many people as much as power or primacy. I call it primacy because according to Plato's idea of thymia, which is basic dignity as a human being, isothymia, which is the need to feel equal, and megalothymia, which is the need to feel superior to others. Most people would rather have power and feel superior to those around them than have peace. This is a reality we need to grapple with. If we don't, we will never be able to prevent violence or bloodshed or even genocide. Many people who feel, and it can be groups, it can be tribes, it can be religions, it can be ethnicities, who feel they need to be superior to their enemies in that area, in that region, they may be willing to accept violence rather than peace. So there are many misconceptions about peace, and we need to recognize. The first is, and this is what is most difficult for many people today, equality. Unequal peace is normal and more sustainable. I have been doing conflict resolution for almost 30 years. And I can tell you something I have learned, which is the most sustainable relationships are not equal relationships, but unequal relationships. Even in a family, a completely equal relationship creates so much tension because each party is constantly trying to guess how the other party will function, and they are jostling for influence and power. This is a tragic reality, but we need to recognize that. The second, equity has become a very fashionable word today in the world of diversity. It's about giving equal opportunity and adjusting the playing field so that everyone has equal opportunity. The moment you adjust the equality of opportunity, you create conflict. I realize that each of these ideas has a lot packed into it. And it would take us 2 days to unpack all of this. But I want you to think about these and feel free to get in touch with me. And I'd love to have a conversation with you on many of these offline. Third, we talk of peace with justice, but peace with justice is a very complex thing because justice, under the best of circumstances, is difficult to achieve. Rule of law is possible. Even that is difficult to enforce. But if you want beyond rule of law, you want justice, I can assure you every group will be unhappy with the quality of justice they have received. And this means we will never have peace. Sustainability is one of the biggest myths about peace. Peace cannot be sustained. You can only have momentary peace when all the stars align or the stakeholders align. But the moment they are in a state of peace, being human, being dynamic, everything starts moving around and the goalpost shifts. So I want to end with 6 principles for alternative peace. The first one is letter, and this is here I'm encapsulating everything. First, if we want peace, we need to understand ruthlessly reality. Reality is what will always come back to bite us if we ignore it. Second, reality is not an option or a choice. It is the only choice. We cannot pick and choose. It's very easy to misunderstand, to not recognize or understand reality. It takes enormous effort. You can't just Google for reality. You can't just find it in an encyclopedia. Any group that is interested in understanding their ground realities needs to do enormous, rigorous, disciplined work. The second principle is that we have to understand the potency of feelings, because all of us experience feelings as real. But feelings tell me more about myself than about the real world. If I'm upset by something you say, that says more about me than about you. But I'm not conscious of that. If we center feelings, we will never reach any kind of peace because feelings are subjective. And subjectivity can never meet. We need a level playing field of objectivity. If I like this analogy, going through life driven by our feelings is like driving a car by looking at a mirror instead of through a windscreen. I am not the image of the world. Looking at my feelings or my face, I cannot understand you. I have to go beyond my feelings and my face in order to understand you. The next principle is understanding perceptions. Perceptions are not reality. It's very important. They may seem like reality. They are the best our brains are doing in order to understand through the senses what is happening. But our senses can deceive us. They are limited. If we wish to understand reality, we have to go beyond perceptions. We have to use critical thinking. We have to cross-check our perceptions with the perceptions of other people. My perceptions are too limited. But the tragedy is that most of us have way too much confidence in our perceptions. The next principle is thinking itself. We know that the thought is a product of the mind, and it is different from feelings and emotions. The important thing to recognize is that thinking is a discipline, and we are responsible for thinking. Thinking doesn't come because of our biology. It comes despite our biology. There is a conscious attempt in the human mind, which has been trained to try and grapple with reality. It's synthetic. It is integrative. It is not natural. There is nothing natural about thinking. It is hard work. And most people do not engage with it. And then we come back to words. We started this entire thing with words. Words, we must recognize, are the first step to waging peace. The problem is many of us are threatened by other people's words. Whether it's in the US, the N word, or whether they're insults or epithets or offensive terms, we are threatened by words. And there's a temptation to ban words, which are hate. We call them hate speech. But there is nothing more dangerous, because when we start banning speech, it forces those who are unhappy or angry to resort to the only other way they can engage with something, which is physical violence. Without the right words, we cannot give voice to our feelings or thoughts. They remain subjective. This is why we cannot have peace without an educated population that knows how to think deliberately and express precisely. The citizenry, the people who we are counting on to create peace, must have the capacity to think beyond their feelings and perceptions. And finally, understanding peace itself, we must stop romanticizing peace. And in the same way, we must stop demonizing violence. I'm not suggesting that violence is good. I'm merely saying it's natural. Peace is more than anything else an abstract idea that doesn't reflect anything in nature. It is created by human beings, by the beauty of our imagination. An imagination that allows us to look at the world and say, why must there be bloodshed? Why must there be pain? Why must there be hurt? That is an extraordinary mind, but it's an idealized mind. It's a visionary but fantasy that we are conjuring up in our minds. It's not necessarily something that exists in nature. It is an aspiration. It is also, and here's the reality, if we genuinely want peace, we must be willing to compromise. We must be willing to engage in really messy work, because we're dealing with nature and reality at its most emotional and brutal. We must also recognize that it's temporary, because as humans, whether it's two people in a relationship, or whether it's societies, whether it's groups, ethnicities, whether it's French speaking or Spanish speaking or English speaking, the dynamic is constantly shifting. And when the dynamic shifts, peace will always break down. And hence, negotiation is a constant state. You cannot create an agreement that will hold peace for 50 years. Almost every year, at the very least, you need to renegotiate, come back to the agreement, because the conditions have changed. On understanding peace, these are hopefully my last thoughts. All peace must correspond to reality and must accommodate to it. We cannot ignore biology, evolution, and history. We cannot confuse and conflate peace with other beautiful things like justice or equality, or even free university education and healthcare for everyone. These are beautiful utopian ideals, and they are guaranteed to create strife and violence. You cannot have it all. If you want free education or free health health care for everyone, you need to make enormous compromises. We all need to. We may not be willing to. We must stop romanticizing peace. I've said this multiple times. This is important. Okay, looks like I have something else, but I'm just going to very quickly say that the world we live in makes it much more challenging to create peace. Everything from diversity, the fact that we don't live in self-contained tribes anymore. We're not connected only by blood. We have people with different languages, different religions, different ideologies, different family lines, bloodlines. We have historical groups with historical grievances, blood feuds coming together. We have also created technologies that divide us. We don't watch the same TV shows anymore. Each one of us streams a different movie or a different music to even our best friends or our families. Each one of us is on a smartphone. There is no community anymore. We don't eat together. One meal a week, forget 3 meals a day. Most of us lead isolated, fragmented lives. A recent report that I read 3 days ago said that most Americans do not have more than 1 or 2 friends, and many have no friends at all. Peace is a stretch in these situations. We have to work much harder. Thank you, everyone. I'm leaving you with this visual with a lot of our projects. We teach courses on critical thinking, on democracy and culture, on pluralism, and on relationships. This is just for you. If you are interested in getting to know about metaculture and our work, here is the information. You can get in touch with me. Thank you. Nikon, if you have questions, and I apologize for taking so long, but I'd be very happy to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Ashok. I think that was brilliantly put. Thank you for that wonderfully put presentation. So I would just like to go ahead with a couple of questions that we have for you. Without wasting any more time, the first question would be, why are words important? After all, they and their meanings change with time, and different cultures and even subcultures use language differently.
Thank you. And you're talking about one of our biggest challenges. Given that words are fluid and language itself morphs from generation to generation, or sometimes even every 5 years, words are the only things we have left. Literally, because words are a tool that we have fashioned. There is no way in which I can understand you without words and without a common understanding of the word. It's almost as though, I'm married. I've been married for 5 years. We speak the same language, English. But it's almost as though every morning when we wake up, if I use a word, there's no guarantee my wife will understand the same word in the same way that she understood it yesterday. Because if she has a headache, my word can mean something different to her when she wakes up with a headache. And yet, I cannot not use words. So I would say it's a tool we are stuck with because we don't have telepathic communication yet. So I would say we need to respect words enormously.
Thank you. So, an idea is an idea. So, peace by any other name would still be peace, wouldn't it?
Here's the problem. Yes, an idea is an idea, and peace by any name will remain peace. The problem is, peace is not one idea. My idea of peace is different from your idea of peace, as is my idea of justice. So you see, imagine we are going on a march to the parliament or to the Congress with protesting against violence or protesting against a war in Iraq or whatever. And we say we want peace, we want justice. These words seem self-evident. We want equality. The problem is when we get away from the march and the shouting and the sloganeering and we sit down across a table, we realize that each of these three words, peace, equality, and justice, have completely different ideas or meanings for each one of us. And this is why peace cannot be a word. We've been using peace as a word. We have to use it as a bucket of words. We have to use peace as a complex coming together of all kinds of things, including things that cannot be defined as words or by words. The biggest danger to peace is those 5 words, 5 letters, P-E-A-C-E. Moment we write it on a slogan or a meme, we think everyone in the world understands it. And they don't. They think they do. When they think they do, it becomes even more dangerous than otherwise.
So, isn't peace a state of mind? So, why cannot we all just chill out about it?
It is partly a state of mind. When we talk about personal peace, and I can chill out. Imagine, for instance, there are times when things have gone wrong during the day, and I had an argument with a client, and I sit down with a glass of beer, and I put on the air conditioning if it's a hot day, and I just look out of my window and I'm chilling out. I can create personal peace. Unfortunately, in society, that's of no use unless everybody is drinking beer or taking opium and therefore so chilled out that they can't fight. So the moment we go into societal peace or even relational peace, chilling out doesn't help. We have to engage with it.
Why should we nitpick about words and meanings? Don't most humans just want to live in peace?
I wish nitpicking is really all about trying to understand something precisely. It's irritating to nitpick, but unless we are interested in genuinely getting to the core, the roots of something, unless we really want to understand something comprehensively, there is no way we can understand or deal with an idea, particularly such a complex idea as peace. Remember, peace is not one state. If we look at peace as just prevention of violence, perhaps you can have it, but there will be chaos at multiple other levels. So we recognize that peace requires so many things. How do we create that? That one word, that one idea isn't enough anymore.
Isn't power and aren't those in power the greatest barriers towards peaceful societies?
You see, one of the things that's happened in our democratic world, particularly in the last 100 years, and maybe particularly after 1945 and the end of World War II, is that we, people living in democracies, have taken on the illusion that all problems are created by people in power. We love to trash big businesses. We love to trash corrupt politicians. We love to trash religious leaders who create disharmony. And there is a good reason for criticizing all of those. But we don't realize that complex societies, particularly democratic societies, depend to a large extent on the culture of the people. And the people have a lot of influence. So you and I are also responsible for those in power and influence corrupting our democracy, bringing about wars. It's easy for us to externalize the problem and to point at those powerful people somewhere else without whom the world would be beautiful. You can change a government, you can't change the people. Take any social issue, female genital mutilation, take dowry, take racism. No matter that Obama becomes the president or you have a reformist government in a country, you cannot shift those social ills without the complete buy-in of the population, the people. We are in a democracy as much a problem as the leaders. Even if we might think the leaders have power, they come from us. It's like police. Police are not an alien species. It's our relatives and our friends and our neighbors who are our police.
Left to ourselves, wouldn't ordinary people live in harmony because we have no political access to grind?
I wish that were the case. Left to ourselves, we would destroy even our homes, leave alone our neighborhoods. Human beings throughout history have experimented with anarchy, have experimented with libertarianism, ways in which we get rid of people in power and we give power back to the ordinary people without the rules to constrain them. And it has resulted in extraordinary violence. Extraordinary violence. So we as a species need governance. We don't necessarily need authoritarian rule, but we definitely need systems to be put in place. We need structure. We need a certain kind of hierarchy, and we need accountability. And this means that there will be some people who have the responsibility for designing the system, for enforcing the system, and they will have more power than the rest of us. You cannot avoid power. You can't do away with power. You have to have it in order to keep even basic order. So we are stuck with it as a species.
Is there a problem with the word peace at all?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure. It is worth thinking about because obviously we are talking about multiple kinds of peace, multiple definitions of peace. So again, the only way I can leave that thought right here is to say that those 5 letters are not clear enough. They don't do justice. I'm not even certain there's such a thing as peace. Not only is it completely situational and contextual, it's like an animation, not a single graphic. You see, it's not one picture which is static. It's an animation that's constantly moving. And if it's moving, then things are happening. And in which case, you cannot have one word to describe that animation.
What is the connection between a feeling, a thought, a word, and the state of the world?
The world, for me, is a combination or is made up of what already exists outside of me and what I bring to it. So there is the physical reality of the world. There is the reality of other people. I have to accept that you exist and that you influence the world around me. But there is also me. And my influence on the world is based on my feelings, my perceptions, my thoughts, my words, and my behaviors. So the connection between these is that I cannot influence the world in any way except through my being in it. And my being in it suggests that all my feelings and thoughts and words and actions impinge on the word, and that changes the world.
Finally, if words are so potent, shouldn't we regulate them so speakers and writers don't create too much damage?
This is the point that we had touched upon earlier, which is that it is very tempting to control speech, because it means that we can ensure that certain words and certain phrases will be banned because those hurt or potentially hurt someone. I've been interested in and working on the issue of free speech for a very long time, particularly because I do a lot of work with dialogue. And there's one thing I have learned, which is, and particularly as a facilitator of dialogue, I am most effective when I give complete flexibility with the use of speech in a dialogue. In a conversation, I say nothing is banned. But please remember that whatever tone or language you use will affect the quality of the dialogue. And when I allow that, and people can say things they would never think of saying because it would be too offensive, magic happens in that dialogue. Most dialogues are impotent exercises in storytelling because the facilitators do not have the courage to manage incendiary or dangerous speech. You have to allow that speech to come out. You have to allow those dangerous words to come out, because then the facilitator can use them in order to teach things that otherwise would not be learned. So I would say speech is so potent. We must allow all forms of it, but we must also have the infrastructure in mind, in place, and the skill and the capability and the wisdom to manage that kind of an environment.
Thank you, Ashok. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to you and to CC. Good luck with the conference, and good luck to the good people of Cameroon. I really hope that you folks can find a way to mitigate and to prevent things from getting worse. Good luck to everyone, to all of us. Thank you.